My name is Margaret, and I'm 58 years old. For 25 years, I dedicated my life to cleaning the offices of Henderson and Associates, a family-owned construction company. Every morning at 5 a.m., I would arrive before anyone else, making sure their world was spotless when they walked through those doors. I took pride in my work, even when they treated me like I was invisible. But on March 15th, everything changed. That was the day they decided to destroy my life, my reputation, and my dignity. They thought they could throw me away like yesterday's trash and laugh about it. They had no idea what I was carrying in that old leather bag of mine. They had no idea that their laughter would soon turn to terror. If you've ever been underestimated, betrayed by people you trusted, or thrown away after years of loyal service, then you'll understand every word of this story. And please, stay until the end, because what I pulled out of that bag changed everything. The morning started like any other. I was mopping the floor in Mr. Richard Henderson's office when his son, Jake, burst through the door with 2 security guards. Jake was 35, entitled, and had never worked a real day in his life. He inherited his position as vice president simply because Daddy owned the company. There she is, Jake pointed at me like I was some kind of criminal. Margaret Thompson, you're fired immediately for theft. I stopped mopping and looked at him confused. Theft? What are you talking about, Mr. Jake? Don't play dumb with me, he sneered. The petty cash box in accounting is missing $200, and you were the only one who had access to clean that area yesterday after hours. My heart started racing. $200? I had never stolen anything in my entire life. Sir, I would never. Save it, Jake interrupted, raising his hand. We have you on camera entering that office. The money disappeared the same night. By now, other employees had gathered around, watching the spectacle. I could see Linda from accounting, Tom from human resources, and several construction workers who knew me well. Their faces showed shock and disappointment. After 25 years of building relationships with these people, they were watching me get accused of being a thief. Sir, please, you can search my purse, my car, my house, I pleaded. I didn't take any money. Why would I risk 25 years of employment for $200? Jake laughed coldly. Maybe because you needed drug money? Maybe because you're desperate? I don't care about your reasons, Margaret. You're done here. The words hit me like physical blows. Drug money? Me? I had raised 3 children as a single mother, put 2 of them through college, and had never even touched alcohol, let alone drugs. But I could see in the employees' eyes that some of them were starting to believe Jake's lies. Mr. Jake, I've cleaned this office since before you could even spell your own name, I said, my voice shaking with emotion. I've watched you grow up. I've covered for you when you came to work drunk. I've cleaned up your messes more times than I can count. How can you do this to me? Enough. Jake shouted. Security, escort her out. Make sure she doesn't take anything that belongs to this company. The security guards, both men I had greeted every morning for years, looked uncomfortable but approached me anyway. Come on, Margaret, one of them said softly. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I gathered my few personal items, a small photo of my grandchildren, my reading glasses, and my old leather bag that I carried everywhere. As I walked toward the exit with the guards flanking me, I could hear whispers and murmurs from the employees. I can't believe Margaret would steal. She always seemed so honest. You never really know people, do you? Each whisper felt like a knife in my back. These were people I had considered friends, people whose personal problems I had listened to, people I had helped when they needed someone to cover their shifts or finish their work. When we reached the lobby, Jake decided to make one final show of his power. He had called more employees down to witness my humiliation. Let this be a lesson to everyone, Jake announced loudly. No one is above the law in this company. Theft will not be tolerated, no matter how long you've worked here. I turned to face him one last time, my old leather bag clutched tightly in my hands. Mr. Jake, you're making a mistake. A big mistake. And someday, when the truth comes out, I'll be back. The entire lobby erupted in laughter. Jake laughed the hardest of all, slapping his knee like I had just told the funniest joke he'd ever heard. "You'll be back," he gasped between laughs. "Margaret, you're 58 years old with no education and no skills beyond pushing a mop. Where exactly are you going to go? Who's going to hire you now that you have theft on your record? You'll be lucky if McDonald's gives you a job." More laughter filled the air. Even some employees I thought cared about me were chuckling. I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of them. "We'll see about that," I said quietly, and walked out the door with whatever dignity I had left. As I sat in my 15-year-old Honda Civic in the parking lot, the tears finally came. 25 years of my life, gone in an instant. 25 years of getting up before dawn, of sacrificing time with my family to make sure their offices were perfect. 25 years of loyalty, respect, and hard work, all erased by a lie. But as I wiped my tears and looked down at my old leather bag, I realized something that Jake Henderson had no idea about. Inside this bag, I carried more than just personal items. I carried 25 years of observations, 25 years of accidentally overhearing conversations, and 25 years of seeing things that powerful men thought no one would ever notice. That night, I went home to my small apartment and sat at my kitchen table with my bag open in front of me. My daughter, Patricia, had come over after hearing about what happened. She was furious. "Mama, we need to sue them for wrongful termination," Patricia said, pacing around my tiny kitchen. "This is discrimination. This is defamation. They can't just destroy your reputation like this." "Baby, I don't have money for lawyers," I replied, pulling out the contents of my bag one by one. "And who's going to believe a 58-year-old black cleaning lady over the Henderson family?" But as I emptied my bag, something caught my eye. Folded up at the bottom, underneath some old receipts and my spare house key, was a piece of paper I had forgotten about. It was a document I had found under Mr. Richard Henderson's desk about 6 months ago while cleaning. I had picked it up, meaning to put it back, but had gotten distracted when Jake came in drunk again and I had to help him to his office. The document had somehow ended up in my bag, and I had completely forgotten about it until now. Patricia watched as I unfolded the paper. "What's that, Mama?" I read the document carefully, and my heart started beating faster. It was an internal memo between Richard Henderson and his accountant, discussing how they were underreporting their earnings to avoid paying taxes. But that wasn't all. As I read further, I discovered that they had been systematically cheating their construction workers out of overtime pay for the past 3 years. "Patricia," I whispered, "I think God just handed me exactly what I need." My daughter looked over my shoulder and read the document. Her eyes widened. "Mama, do you know what this is? This is evidence of tax evasion and wage theft. This could bring down their entire company." But I wasn't finished going through my bag. Over the years, I had developed a habit of collecting things that seemed important but were left lying around. Most cleaning ladies throw everything away, but I always worried about throwing away something valuable by mistake. So I would put questionable papers in my bag to ask about later, though I rarely remembered to ask. Now, as I went through years of accumulated papers, I found treasure after treasure. There was a contract showing that Henderson and Associates had billed the city for materials they never purchased. There were emails printed out and left on desks discussing bribing a building inspector. There were time sheets that had been altered to avoid paying workers their full wages. Patricia and I spent hours going through everything. By midnight, we had documented evidence of tax evasion, fraud, bribery, and wage theft going back almost 5 years. "Mama," Patricia said, staring at the pile of documents, "you don't just have enough to clear your name. You have enough to send them to prison." I looked at my daughter and smiled for the first time in days. "Baby, your mama might be 58 years old, but I'm not stupid. Jake Henderson thinks he destroyed me today, but he just made the biggest mistake of his entitled life." The next morning, I called every lawyer in the phone book. Most of them wouldn't even take my call once they heard I was fighting Henderson and Associates. The Henderson family had money, power, and connections. Who was I? Just a fired cleaning lady with no resources. But finally, I reached the office of Maria Gonzalez, a young labor attorney who specialized in helping working-class people fight against powerful employers. "Mrs. Thompson," she said when I explained my situation, "wrongful termination cases are difficult and expensive. If you don't have evidence." "I have evidence," I interrupted. "I have lots of evidence." When I met with Maria the next day and showed her the documents, her professional composure cracked. She stared at the papers with her mouth open. "Mrs. Thompson, where did you get these?" I explained about finding the papers while cleaning over the years, how they had accumulated in my bag, and how I had forgotten about most of them. "Do you understand what you have here?" Maria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't just a wrongful termination case anymore. This is criminal evidence. We're talking about federal tax evasion, fraud, and systematic wage theft. The FBI will be very interested in these documents." "I don't want to go to the FBI," I said. "I want my job back, I want my reputation cleared, and I want them to pay for what they did to me." Maria nodded. "We can do all of that and more. But Mrs. Thompson, you need to understand that once we file this lawsuit, there's no going back. The Henderson family is going to come after you with everything they have. They're going to try to destroy you in ways you can't even imagine." I thought about Jake's laughter, about the way he humiliated me in front of everyone I had worked with for 25 years. I thought about how he accused me of being a drug addict and a thief. I thought about how he said I would be lucky to get a job at McDonald's. "Let them try," I said. "I've been underestimated my whole life. It's time to show them what happens when you push a woman like me too far." Word travels fast in a small town, and within a week, rumors were circulating that I was planning to sue Henderson and Associates. I heard through the grapevine that Jake was telling everyone I was delusional, that I would never find a lawyer willing to take my case against his family. But what Jake didn't know was that Maria Gonzalez wasn't just any lawyer. She was the daughter of migrant workers who had been cheated out of wages by powerful employers her entire childhood. She had graduated top of her class from law school specifically to fight for people like me. And when she saw the evidence I had, she took my case for free. 3 weeks after I was fired, Maria filed a lawsuit against Henderson and Associates for wrongful termination, defamation, and wage theft. But she didn't stop there. She also contacted the Department of Labor, the IRS, and the FBI. Within days, federal investigators were crawling all over the Henderson offices. They seized computers, financial records, and began interviewing employees. The local news picked up the story, and suddenly everyone in town was talking about the corruption at Henderson and Associates. I watched the news coverage from my living room, feeling a satisfaction I hadn't experienced in years. The reporter was standing in front of the Henderson building, explaining how a former employee had provided evidence of years of financial crimes. My phone started ringing. Former Henderson employees began calling me, saying they had been cheated out of wages too but had been afraid to speak up. Linda from accounting called, crying and apologizing for believing Jake's lies about me. Even some of the security guards reached out to express their regret for how they had treated me. But the best call came from Tom in Human Resources. "Margaret," he said, his voice shaking, "I owe you an apology. Jake forced me to go along with firing you. He said if I didn't back up his story about the theft, he would fire me too. I have 3 kids, and I couldn't afford to lose my job. But I never believed you were a thief." "Why are you telling me this now, Tom?" I asked. "Because the FBI wants to interview all the employees, and I'm going to tell them the truth. Jake made up the theft story because he was the one who took the money from petty cash. He needed it for gambling debts, and when his father started asking questions, Jake decided to blame you." I felt vindicated but not surprised. I had suspected all along that I was being set up, but hearing the confirmation still made my blood boil. 2 months after the lawsuit was filed, Maria called me with news. "Margaret, they want to settle." "For how much?" $2 million. I nearly dropped the phone. $2 million. I had never even imagined having that kind of money. "But there's more," Maria continued. The federal investigation has uncovered even more crimes than we originally documented. Jake Henderson is facing criminal charges for tax evasion, fraud, and theft. Richard Henderson is probably going to lose the business entirely. I thought about it for a moment. $2 million would change my life completely. I could buy a house, help my children, maybe even start my own business. But money wasn't the only thing I wanted. Maria, I want something else too, I said. What's that? I want a public apology. I want Jake Henderson to admit in front of everyone that he lied about me, that I never stole anything, and that he destroyed my reputation based on lies. Maria was quiet for a moment. Margaret, they're not going to want to do that. A public apology is admitting guilt, and they're already facing criminal charges. Then no deal, I said firmly. I don't just want money. I want my name cleared. I want everyone who laughed at me that day to know the truth. 3 weeks later, I received a call that changed everything. Richard Henderson himself wanted to meet with me personally to discuss a settlement. Mrs. Thompson, Maria warned me, he's going to try to intimidate you. These powerful men don't like being challenged, especially by someone they consider beneath them. Let him try, I replied. I've got something in my bag that he's very interested in getting back. The meeting was set for the following Tuesday at 2 p.m. in the Henderson and Associates conference room. The same building where I had been humiliated and escorted out like a criminal 2 months earlier. I spent the entire weekend preparing. I chose my best dress, a navy blue outfit my daughter had bought me for her wedding. I did my hair at the salon and even bought a new pair of shoes. If I was going back to that building, I was going back with dignity. Tuesday afternoon arrived, and I walked through those familiar doors carrying my old leather bag. The same bag that Jake had mocked, the same bag that held 25 years of memories, and now the same bag that held the power to destroy everything the Henderson family had built. The receptionist, a young woman I had never seen before, looked at me suspiciously. "You're Mrs. Thompson?" "Yes, I am." She seemed surprised that I looked so professional and composed. "They're waiting for you in the conference room." As I walked down the hallway, I passed several employees who recognized me. Some looked away in embarrassment, others nodded respectfully. Word had gotten out about what really happened, and everyone now knew I had been set up. I opened the conference room door and saw them sitting there, Richard Henderson, Jake Henderson, their team of lawyers, and Maria Gonzalez. The atmosphere was tense, and I could see fear in Jake's eyes for the first time since I had known him. Richard Henderson, a man in his 70s who had always been polite but distant to me, stood up as I entered. "Margaret, thank you for coming." I sat down across from them and placed my leather bag on the table. Jake's eyes immediately went to the bag, and I saw him swallow nervously. "Gentlemen," Maria began, "my client has agreed to this meeting, but her position hasn't changed. $2 million in damages, plus a public apology admitting that she was wrongfully terminated and never committed any theft." Richard Henderson leaned forward. "Margaret, let's be reasonable here. $2 million is a lot of money for someone in your position. You could live comfortably for the rest of your life. Why do you need the public apology?" I looked him directly in the eyes. "Mr. Henderson, with all due respect, you don't understand what your son did to me. He didn't just fire me. He destroyed my reputation in front of people I had worked with for 25 years. He called me a drug addict and a thief. He made me feel like I was worthless." "Dad, just pay her the money and let's be done with this," Jake interrupted, his voice strained. I turned to Jake, and for the first time in 2 months, I smiled at him. "What's wrong, Mr. Jake? You seem nervous. Are you worried about something?" Jake's face turned red. "I'm not nervous about anything. I just want to settle this and move on." "Move on?" I repeated. "That's interesting. Because I remember what you said to me the day you fired me. You said I would never find another job. You said I would be lucky if McDonald's hired me. You laughed at me when I said I would be back." I reached for my leather bag and slowly unzipped it. Every eye in the room was focused on my hands. "You see this bag, Mr. Jake? You and everyone else laughed at this old bag. You thought it just carried the belongings of a poor cleaning lady. But you know what? This bag carried something much more valuable than you ever imagined. I pulled out a folder containing copies of all the documents I had found over the years. Jake's face went completely pale. Your biggest mistake wasn't firing me, I continued, my voice growing stronger. Your biggest mistake was underestimating me. You thought I was just some ignorant old woman who would disappear quietly. But I've been watching, I've been listening, and I've been collecting evidence of your crimes for years without even realizing it. Richard Henderson looked at his son with confusion and growing anger. What is she talking about, Jake? I opened the folder and placed the documents on the table one by one. Tax evasion. Fraud. Bribery. Wage theft. And the best part? Your son has been stealing from your own petty cash to pay gambling debts, then blaming innocent employees. Jake jumped up from his chair. Those documents are stolen. She had no right to take them. Actually, Maria interjected smoothly, Mrs. Thompson found these documents while performing her legitimate duties as a cleaning employee. Anything left out in the open in an office is not considered private or confidential under the law. Richard Henderson was now staring at his son with a look of pure fury. Jake, is this true? Have you been stealing from the company? Jake's lawyer whispered something in his ear, and Jake sat back down without answering. I continued pulling documents from my bag. With each new piece of evidence, the color drained further from Jake's face, and his father's anger grew more visible. You want to know what I think is really funny, Mr. Jake? I said, placing the last document on the table. You fired me for allegedly stealing $200. But according to these documents, you've stolen over $50,000 from your own father's company in the past year alone. The room fell completely silent. Richard Henderson was reading through the documents, his hands shaking with rage. Finally, the older Henderson spoke. Margaret, what do you want? I leaned back in my chair, feeling more powerful than I had ever felt in my entire life. I want my $2 million. I want a written letter of apology that will be published in the local newspaper, admitting that I was wrongfully terminated and never committed any theft. And I want Jake to personally deliver that apology to me in front of every employee in this building. That's outrageous. Jake shouted. I'm not apologizing to some cleaning lady. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Even his own lawyers looked embarrassed by his outburst. I stood up slowly, gathering my documents and putting them back in my leather bag. Well, then I guess we'll see you in court. And in federal prison. As I turned to leave, Richard Henderson called out. Wait, Margaret. Please, sit back down. I turned around. Are you prepared to meet my demands, Mr. Henderson? Richard Henderson looked at his son with disgust, then back at me. Yes. All of them. Jake started to protest, but his father cut him off with a sharp gesture. Shut up, Jake. You've done enough damage. 2 weeks later, the entire staff of Henderson and Associates was gathered in the main lobby. Local news cameras were present, and the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. I walked through those doors one more time, wearing my best dress and carrying my faithful leather bag. But this time, instead of being escorted out by security guards, I was being escorted in by my lawyer as the victor. Jake Henderson stood at a podium, looking like he was about to vomit. His father stood beside him, glaring with disappointment and anger. I have a statement to read, Jake began, his voice barely audible. Louder, Richard Henderson commanded. Jake cleared his throat and spoke louder. I, Jake Henderson, want to publicly apologize to Margaret Thompson for my actions on March 15th. Mrs. Thompson was wrongfully terminated from her position at Henderson and Associates. She was falsely accused of theft, which she did not commit. Mrs. Thompson served this company faithfully for 25 years, and she deserved better treatment than she received. I take full responsibility for the lies I told about her character, and I deeply regret the damage I caused to her reputation. The room was completely silent. Many of the employees were staring at Jake in shock, while others were looking at me with new respect and admiration. But I wasn't done yet. "Mr. Jake," I said, stepping forward. "Is there anything else you'd like to say?" Jake looked at his father, who nodded sternly. "Mrs. Thompson," Jake continued, "you are an honorable woman who deserved respect, not the treatment you received. I was wrong to underestimate you, and I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me." I walked up to the podium and looked out at all the faces in the crowd. Many of these people had laughed at me, had believed the lies, had watched me get humiliated without standing up for me. 25 years ago, I started working in this building as a young woman trying to support my family. I gave my heart and soul to this company. I took pride in my work, even when I was treated as invisible. But I learned something important these past few months. I paused and looked directly at Jake, then at the cameras. I learned that integrity isn't about how much money you have or what position you hold. It's about doing the right thing even when no one is watching. It's about treating people with dignity and respect, regardless of their job title. And it's about standing up for yourself when others try to tear you down. I held up my leather bag for everyone to see. You all laughed at this old bag. You thought it just carried the belongings of a poor cleaning lady. But this bag carried something more powerful than money, more valuable than status. It carried the truth. And the truth has a way of coming to light, no matter how hard people try to bury it. I looked around the room one more time. To those of you who believed in me, thank you. To those of you who laughed at me, I forgive you. But remember this moment. Remember that you should never underestimate someone based on their appearance, their age, or their job title. You never know what they might be carrying in their bag. The crowd erupted in applause. Several employees were crying, including Linda from accounting, who had called to apologize weeks earlier. As I walked out of that building for the final time, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not just because of the $2 million settlement waiting for me, but because I had reclaimed my dignity and proven that David really can defeat Goliath. 6 months later, I used part of my settlement money to open Thompson's Cleaning Services, a company that provides fair wages and respectful treatment to all employees. I hired several former Henderson and Associates workers who had been laid off when the company downsized due to their legal troubles. Jake Henderson was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison for tax evasion and fraud. His father lost the business and had to declare bankruptcy. The family name that had meant power and respect in our community became synonymous with corruption and disgrace. As for me, I'm still 58 years old, but I'm no longer invisible. I'm a successful businesswoman, a millionaire, and most importantly, I'm a woman who proved that you should never judge someone by what they appear to be carrying in their bag. Sometimes the most ordinary-looking bag carries the most extraordinary contents. Sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the one with the power to change everything. And sometimes, the cleaning lady who gets laughed at is the same one who ends up cleaning house in ways no one ever expected. If you've ever been underestimated, discriminated against, or thrown away by people who thought they were better than you, remember my story. Keep your dignity, collect your evidence, and never give up. Because you never know when that old bag of yours might contain exactly what you need to turn your life around. The next time someone laughs at you and thinks you're powerless, just smile and remember Margaret Thompson. Remember that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one that everyone underestimates. And remember that justice might be slow, but when it finally arrives, it's always carrying exactly the right bag for the job.